So when we talk about data quality, somebody already brought this up earlier, this idea of accuracy and reliability in our data. And there's some common considerations for data quality as you are beginning an evaluation. So you want to think about how can you enhance completeness of your data by increasing participation. You can also enhance representativeness by making decisions about sampling, such as trying to get as many participants as possible from all kinds of backgrounds, experiences, roles in the program. You can examine completeness by checking to see whether all the data are available for the time period of interest in your evaluation. And then you also need to think about how to make valid inferences or draw conclusions from the data. You might be able to improve the data collection instruments, ensuring that your data instruments are consistent, they're easy to understand, and they minimize the burden on the part of participants, so participants will complete them. And you also want to train your data collectors so that everybody has a consistent way of collecting that data. So there are some popular considerations that we've culled here from the CDC, and they are also part of the program evaluation standards. And these considerations are usability, feasibility, propriety, and accuracy. So for usability, we want to think about questions such as whether and how the evaluation information will be used, and will that information be seen as credible. So for example, in the STEM partnership program, if they were trying to improve their professional learning communities, you'd want to be sure that your teachers, parents, and university faculty who are part of the PLCs can provide input into which data are most credible and most useful for them. You also want to avoid using data that's not for its intended purpose. So for example, you wouldn't want to use scores on an assessment that students take as a baseline at the beginning of the year to determine how much students have learned at the end of the year, right? That's a pretty common example of how you wouldn't use that baseline data. And then feasibility relates to whether the data collection plan is realistic and if there are enough resources to complete it. So if you're trying to improve those PLCs, you probably wouldn't spend the time doing an in-depth observation of every single PLC meeting, but instead you might select a sample, right? Observing all PLC meetings is not feasible. So additionally, this component asks you to consider if you will be able to get the data you want from your participants, knowing who they are. So if, for example, you were to be surveying young children, you would want your questions and your vocabulary to be age appropriate so they can understand what's being asked. So we want to make sure that those methods and sources are consistent with the culture and the characteristics of your participants. The two other considerations are propriety and accuracy. Propriety is about whether the data can be collected in a way that's not overly burdensome. So for example, you wouldn't ask people to complete 2-hour, 3-hour-long interviews. You'd probably lose their attention after about 60 to 90 minutes. You wouldn't ask people to complete a survey that takes 4 hours. It's just not feasible for them. So this is related to avoiding evaluation burden. It's also important to respect issues of confidentiality and safety, such as not revealing that personal information in the data if you've promised them that it's confidential or anonymous. And there's some other ethical considerations that we think about, including ensuring that people have a chance to consent to be part of the data collection so they know that they are participating in a study or an evaluation, letting them know that their participation is voluntary and they can stop at any time, and they should always be able to opt in or out of data collection. And then the last consideration is accuracy, which means avoiding mistakes and errors in data entry. In this case, evaluators will want to make sure that there is a clear and consistent process to collect the data. If several people are observing PLC meetings and taking notes, as we've already said, you would want to be sure that they have the training so they can be on the same page to know what they're looking for and how to record their notes.